There's a lot of challenges when it comes to booking guests. Tell us your story a little bit, how you came to decide that this was something that was going to be very helpful to podcasters and live streamers.
Yeah, sure. So, like a lot of people who do podcasts, I kind of was having some conversations, happened to be with a colleague at work who had met. I went back to school for technology, computer science, and we were having these conversations about raising kids in a digital world effectively, or at least that's the new tagline that we've come up with. But what we were doing, we were talking about how we're the very last digital immigrants to raise the very first digital natives. And there was never going to be another point in time like that ever again in history, right? There was this sort of a interesting place to be in history. So we did like what everybody would do. We said, let's just grab our microphones and let's start recording, and everybody's going to come check out our show and we're going to be rich and famous. And that's, of course, not what happened at all. As anybody that podcasts or does live streaming knows, you jump in and you get 5, 6, you just don't get much traction out of the gate for sure. It's a grind, it's work, it's effort. But what was cool about that was because it didn't get any traction, it freed us up to do pretty much whatever we wanted. It was our show, and we started doing some things with the kids. And interestingly, we started to have guests. We started reaching out to guests, and I had no clue what I was doing, but I was the one tasked with going out and finding these guests, finding people who might be able to talk on various subjects within the space of just raising kids in a digital world. We talked cyberbullying. We talked, online predators. But we also talked like video games. We talked all kinds of things. And so a big source for me at the time was Amazon. And because we didn't really have a niche per se where I could go and find everybody in like real estate or everybody in like business, ours was more broad. So I was out there all over the place, all over the internet, trying to find guests, connect with them, coordinate interviews. I absolutely loved the value of what these guests brought to the table when we were able to get them on, but it was a huge effort. So fast forwarding, we did that show for 2.5 years. That was started in like 2014, did that for a while, loved it, loved the show. But part of it was, as you know, Ross, all of this stuff takes time and takes effort. And part of that time and effort was the guest process. And so all of that put together led to us doing what they call pod fading, which means you take a break and then you never come back. You plan to, but you never show back up. And but my co-host and I, and then he actually had another show about game development with another guy. So 3 of us went out and found a couple more people later. And we said, this problem's still not solved for podcasters, for guests. There's a lot of people out there trying to connect, trying to find each other, trying to get these interviews, and there's not a really great way to do it. And that's where the idea of what Podit was created.
So what are the biggest pain points that you've heard from people that you've experienced yourself? If you had to list 3 or 4, what are the challenges that you set out to solve specifically?
So I think it comes down to discoverability, connecting, and then coordination, right? And if when you're trying to discover people, there's different problems depending on different phases, right? So if you're a brand new live streamer or podcaster, you're a little intimidated. And so discovery for you is you're trying to reach out there and get a name for yourself. As you get a little more traction, though, you start to have people coming to you. And then it becomes, it's always a vetting issue, but it becomes more of a vetting issue in identifying the right quality because you've developed a back catalog. And so what topic, what angle, so it shifts a little bit as you continue to mature along your journey, for sure. But definitely discovering and connecting with the right guests is a tough thing, and it's a time sink. So that's problem number 1, pain point number 1. Number 2 is once you identify them, are they looking to be on a show, right? If you're out there on the interwebs and you're just on Amazon or you're on various things, I've reached out to so many hosts or guests potentially, and they may not be wanting to promote their book. They may not be wanting to come on a show. They might not want to come on your show. So you just got to be able to be told no. But that's definitely a pain point too. And then once you actually get them to say yes, coordination of an interview can be a challenge, especially if you're trying to do like StreamYard and you're trying to have 9 people on with you at one time and 10 people, then that's a massive coordination, not just of calendars, but all of the parts with that. And I noticed something too, Ross, and I wanted to mention that with live streaming, I thought about this prior to our interview. I think there's a bit more of a risk here with live streaming, right? Because you've done all this promotion and all this stuff. And I was like, wow, what would happen? I would never do this. But what would happen to Ross if I no-showed him right now? which has absolutely happened to me a couple of times as a podcaster. But for a live streamer, that's a different game. So that's a whole nother, I think there's a separate set of pain points for live streamers that they need to really think about as well, and having backup plans and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably go into some Q&A,
Yeah.
share more about the features, and just chat, go off the top of my head, rant about some topic that I'm interested in, ask people to come into perhaps put the link out and take some questions of people calling in. There's a variety of different things you can do. I've been fortunate because mostly I'm interviewing fellow live streamers or people, if they're on the podcast side, they're pretty advanced, or they have a product that they're, that they founded or that they're promoting. So there's a risk to them to not show up, right? And it's part of what they do. So, but I imagine when you're booking people that you don't know or that, have really no connection to this, there isn't the same risk if they don't show up. They're not sort of falling on their face in front of their own industry. No. And so that is something to think about. And I imagine the people, for example, who are using Podit, it's not going to be helpful to them in getting good recommendations and, getting their profile in front of people if they don't show up. For people who may be new to doing interview shows, what do you look at? If you had to define what makes somebody a good guest, what do you look for? Is it a big name? Is it somebody that you have good chemistry with? Or is it somebody who's an expert, or just somebody who can talk to a subject? Like, what do you look at? Do you look at it like, do they promote? What are the top criteria that you look at and you think people should look at when considering whether or not to book a guest?
Yeah, you hit a lot of them right there, but I think the key thing is that this is your show, and each show is so unique, right? My Digital Dad show that I did, and that's a live, but I'm not plugging it because we don't care about it. We don't do new episodes, but I wanted to use it as an example because that show, it was a whole different particular guest that I was looking for versus like a business show. The business show that I'm doing, Long Tail Success, of course, strategy plays a factor. I think we'd be lying and naive if we said that there wasn't a certain strategy to the particular guest we're bringing on. That is going to be a component. And I would say that if you're in a niche and you can tie in a bunch of people that are in a network, it helps you to start to establish yourself and get a name recognition among that group. But I'm always favoring content over celebrity. Now, with the new show, I've got a couple of pretty big name guests, but I'll drop their names and people probably may or may not know them. Bob Berg of The Go Giver and Brendan Kane of 1 million followers, right? But if you're not in that niche or you don't follow that stuff, you don't even know them. So celebrity is kind of, unless it's like a Kardashian or something. And then there's people that don't like her either. So, and I'll tell you, I won't name which one, but one of them that has the celebrity status, there's a bit of a risk there. If you're focused on celebrity over content, one thing you're going to maybe misperceive is how much they're invested in you if you're smaller, right? So when we did Digital Dads, we had a big name guest, had over 2 million followers on his Twitter, right? Big name guest. And he did do a tweet, but it barely budged for us. Also, he treated it like it was an afterthought for him. His wife was washing dishes in the background. It just wasn't the quality of content, which is what brought people to our show, which is why people came back to our show. And so even though the name was there, even though the Twitter following was there, even though he did promote it on Twitter or at least tweet it, we didn't get the traction because the quality wasn't there. So I would say if you can do a little due diligence and find quality people, chemistry, humor, if that's your bag. If you're a science show or a math show, humor might not be as important, Right. So it's a little situational depending on your personality, depending on your show style and a lot of factors. And at the beginning, I think you're going to have to just sort of start to figure that out, because at first you're just going to have to get in there and try and iterate, because you're not going to have everything figured out at first. You're going to grow and learn and look back and go, wow, look how far I've come.
Yeah, I mean, that's really rude to be doing the dishes or having somebody doing the dishes. The great thing about live stream is, unlike, say, podcast where it can be very awkward because it's just you and the person, on a live stream, it's a little bit easier to say, hey, can you put some headphones on? Or, hey,
Right.
I'm hearing a banging in the background. People are having trouble hearing or whatever. It's like you can kind of push them to do the right thing. It's much harder on a podcast where it's like, what am I going to do? Am I going to stop and record again? Or am
Yeah.
I going to, have a fight with this person? It's a lot easier when it's you in a live audience.
He acknowledged her doing the dishes and she just kept doing them. And it was this weird, awkward thing for a segment where we just had to edit it out. Maybe he just knew we could edit it out, but it was just, I don't know, there was a lack of sort of, I don't know, respect for us. And so not saying that would happen. We've had some big name guests that have been amazing, but it's a risk, I think, with some of them that think they're just sort of the hierarchies shifted in their favor. It's different sometimes.
Let's flip it around now, because part of what you're doing with Potted and part of what a lot of people who are hosting podcasts and live stream shows themselves are doing is also being guests on shows. Hardly a week goes by where I'm not doing one or two interviews about StreamYard or about live streaming or so forth. And I love doing it, and I love getting out there and just letting people know and answering questions. And I enjoy the fact that, I then get to give more my opinions and rather than set somebody else up, which is also fun because it kind of lets me think about where things are going in the industry and stuff like that. What is the value for people who want to be guests on shows, and what's the best way to go about doing that?
Well, I'm biased as far as the best way goes, but we're new. We're still in beta, and there's a lot of things that we're trying to set up. So there's multiple ways you can go about doing it. I would say definitely Facebook groups are valuable. It's a bit shotgun, but if you can find Facebook groups targeted to your niche, get in there. And this is huge. Get in there and add value. Get in there and be part of the conversation. Get in there and start to know a few people and get the lay of the land before you get in there and start screaming at people. Because I did an entire article about, why are you screaming at me and being spammy McSpammerson. The problem is nobody's going to listen. Everybody's got a show. Everybody's got a thing. Nobody wants to hear it. Why do they care? And if you can't identify why they care, you are wasting your time and theirs. So definitely do that. But once you do start to build those relationships and they do start to see what you have to offer and value, and they do start to see that you care about them as human beings and what they're doing, there's a law of reciprocity that starts to take place. You can't really expect it, but it does start to come out and say, well, hey, why don't you come, and I start digging around on Ross a little bit, and you and I formed a relationship over time.
Right.
I'm like, yeah, this guy, of course, you're popping up everywhere, which is great, but that's not why I have you on the show. There's a lot of value there. You're a great guy. You got a good sense of humor. You know your stuff. And then look, those relationships, that's one thing I think that people don't realize all the time too, is having people on your show, not with an expectation that it'll be reciprocated back on their show, but it does happen. It happens quite frequently if there's a good match and you're both in the same niche and they see that you're a good communicator. It does happen. So one thing you could do is just have people on your show and keep in the back of your mind, well, they have a show, so maybe I would be on their show one day.
Right.
I say that, but I've never really done that because you can't really think of because I'm to a fault. I don't think about what other people can do for me that much, and I've been told that you should have that in your strategy as part of your deal. But
well, I just want to mention, I put up on your screen your profile for those who haven't checked out potted.net. It's a beautiful website. You can see that everybody who wants to be a guest on shows can create their own profile, and then you also create profiles for your shows. So, for example, I'll just show one here for StreamYard Connect. And yes, I do distribute the recording as a podcast, but you don't have to have a podcast RSS feed in order to use this. You use it for your Potted live stream show, right?
Yep.
So you this is totally open and possible for live stream guests and hosts to connect using Potted.
Right. And if you look at that right there, you can see there's the social media links. If you want to check out /digitaldads, potted.net /digitaldads, I've got some podcast episodes there. You've got a YouTube. So the idea is that everything right there easily for someone to make a decision about whether or not they want to be on the show. Because again, Ross, one of the big key factors in it being a successful episode is, did it match up correctly? The times when I can look back and say that wasn't so great, I didn't do my homework as a host, or maybe there wasn't quite as good a fit or the topic. And so that could have been resolved with a little bit more due diligence. But sometimes that due diligence on the internet can be really challenging if you're trying to chase down somebody's website and find everything that way. Right. So that's the intent there.
So tell us a little bit about the team at Poddit. You've been the public face among the co-founders. Who else is working on it with you? Doesn't necessarily have to be their names, but just, tell us a little bit about the makeup of the team and where you are, where you're going with the startup.
Yeah, absolutely. So we, again, doing this around jobs and everybody's kind of scrambling, and it can be challenging. But at the same time, it's incredibly gratifying to be trying to put something so big into the world that matters to so many people. The team is composed of myself, Andrew Curry, who was my co-host on Digital Dads. He had another co-host, in fact, a colleague at work too, named Eduardo Castillo Fernandez. Some of you may have met if you went to PodFest. He's one of our core developers. Andrew wears a lot of hats. And then we've got Aaron Danley, who's another co-founder. He's the design guy, and you're about to see a lot of cool design stuff coming from him on the site real soon. And then we've got a few other people flanking that are newer, that are kind of getting their heels. You can see all that on YouTube and get their background, developers, and we just kind of had to scale the team a little bit to try to deliver on what we're trying to do. What's neat is that we've already seen enough traction to say this idea resonates with us. And so now it's up to us to try to execute and make it into what's in our heads and get that translated out into the web and the real world so that you guys can use it and get the benefit of it.
And how do you plan to monetize it? Is it advertising? Is it subscriptions? Tell us about your plans for monetization.
So on the podcast side or the live stream side, that's the platform. And so that doesn't cost anybody anything. On the guest side, and you're going to see some stuff coming out here real soon, we also wanted to make sure that, so when I had the old show, we had like a university professor on there. We had a doctor on there who may not get an ROI per se from being a guest, but we know those people are really valuable for our network. So we've got them in there. And so there's a really strong free offering for guests. Then if you want to basically make a better first impression, you can upgrade your profile. And if you want to basically get, spotlighted out in various searches and things like that. So that's all under the Rockstar category. So that's a monetized piece. And that's really where I think you're going to see some things come out here. I can't really talk too much about it, but in the next probably couple months, that'll really start to highlight value for the people who pay, while at the same time simultaneously being very still useful for people who aren't paying. And that's sometimes tricky, but I think we've really nailed it here with the next stuff we're launching.
Anything else you can share as far as what's coming to the site going forward? And also, whether there is or there's not, I just want to say that what's interesting is it seems like on the podcasting side, more so than the live streaming side, there's something out there's so many startups and businesses around podcasting help you with your podcast and everything. And I think it's quite an accomplishment to come in and make an impact with a new website or a new app around podcasting. How did you come to the idea that have the confidence to put your time and maybe your dollars as well into something like this when there's such a crowded market, I think, on the podcast side for services and startups?
I think maybe personality is part of it for sure, but also my skill set's always kind of been just problem solving, whether it be math, whether it be science, whether it be computer science. I'm just a problem solver. I see things, I attack them, I break them down, and I deconstruct them. That's just a nature that I have. And so I've learned to trust that over a long period of time, my entire life. And so when we looked at this, and myself and Andrew, and he's kind of the same way, and we all looked at this and we had the experience. I think this is key too, because some people have come into this space and become podcasters after the fact. It doesn't mean they're not building great products, but we came in as podcasters saying this pain point we had as podcasters hasn't been solved yet. And I will say to you, Ross, plain right here and be very candid, what we have right now is effectively two directories, one on the live stream or podcast side, one on the guest side, and a way for them to connect. What you will see here very soon is an entirely different product. You asked me about what does this become? So imagine a Facebook-like experience where you can see somebody can talk about this today because this is topical, and then you have the opportunity to then go and see and vet them based on their profile. So all of a sudden the profile is there, you can browse that, but there's a more immediate sort of feed kind of thing that's more tangible to you, and it's interesting and it's new and it's different. It also gives people a way to surface to the top if they go in and create their profile now. Yeah, they can still get found with search, but it's a directory, and it's not as people are more accustomed to a Facebook-like experience. So there's something we're kind of that's early on, but that's still probably 2-3 months out. But that's part of another piece we're building, which is called our interview inbox. And the inbox is going to be a state-driven. So when you have an interview, you make an interview request, and then you might request to be interviewed on my show. And I say, well, I'm interested in that, Ross, maybe. And then that opens up dialogue. And so what we do is we create this interview object, and it moves through, and it goes from, it was a request. Now it's you're marking it as interested. Now you're marking it as accepted. Now you're marking it as recorded, and it's going through all the states. Well, as we hit those states, we know then that we can tie in other services later to those, because we know where you are in the process. Right. We know that you've now sent out the interview to me, and we're going to need to record. So we could potentially marry in StreamYard. So you could kick it off from there, all from that centralized place. Right. So what we believe is this is going to end up saving people a whole lot of time as we move forward. And then the other thing we're doing, a little bit more cosmetic, but also helping surface, one of our big key initiatives coming up is helping you identify good guests, quality guests, people that are relevant to you. And so one of the things we're doing is we're revamping the logged out homepage. We're revamping a lot of stuff on the inside to highlight people who are being active, people who are being invited, to really kind of, and we're sending out emails to you, Ross. Hey, Ross, look, here's some people you might want to have on your show. What's nice there is if we do good and those algorithms improve, then we're going to learn what Ross wants. And all of a sudden, Ross doesn't have to spend all that time out there in discovery, because maybe every once in a while we hand deliver you one. So right. All of those things put together, we feel like are really going to save you a lot of time. And a lot of what we're doing right now is building a skeleton of a framework, really, so that we can piggyback a whole lot of exciting things even more so on that. There's a long roadmap ahead. But I think you're going to see a lot come out over the next 8 to 12 weeks that are really going to surprise some people about it being a very different product.
I would recommend people, even if your podcast or your live stream show right now doesn't need guests, or maybe it's not even a guest-based show, I would recommend doing a profile anyway for your podcast or your live stream show, because it's kind of like the LinkedIn of live streaming or podcasting. You get to put all your credentials, your pictures, your video clips. You get to describe your podcast. It's another place to be found. It's another link to give people when you want to show them what you're doing in, an organized, nicely, professionally designed profile for your podcast or your live stream show. What are your thoughts on that? Like, even if right now, say, getting a guest on isn't a need, you might as well create it and let it be out there. Let the desire build in people. But it's also just a great way to show what you're doing to people who might be interested in your show.
Yeah, and what you can do, and I think a lot of people might do. How many people out here don't want more viewers or more people in their community? Right? I mean, show of hands, it's going to be crickets. Everybody does. We all do, right? So one of the best ways to do that is get on other shows, get on other podcasts, get your name out there. Ross, you and I are on right now because we've been on other shows at events. We know, and we're in that community. We're connecting with other people. And so you can leverage our platform and others to get your name out there more. The whole name of the game with my new show is know, like, and trust. Well, if they don't know you, they're never going to like and trust you. They have to know you first. And that's where you could go in there, set up your profile, have your show in there. Even if, like I say, we're going to actually put some toggles where you don't have to accept guests, but it's a credibility factor, and people might have you on as a guest. Right? Which can help them know about your show. Or you can ask to be on other shows as a guest, which can help to grow your show. And there's a free version. So, but like you said too, it's not going to hurt with SEO either, because a lot of that's public facing. And so Google crawlers can find all that stuff, and it's just going to be backlink, like all of that stuff. You're going to go on our site, create your profile, put backlinks to all your stuff. That helps your SEO just right there. It costs you nothing but a little bit of time, and it's not even that much time. So
we're talking with Brent Basham. He's the co-founder of Podit.net. It's a great app for website for putting both your podcast and your live stream show, but also for creating a guest profile. And it just speeds the time to market for booking guests for your shows or getting booked on shows. We want to take some questions, if that's all right with you, Brent, about guesting on podcasts and live stream shows, about Pod It, and then if there's some questions about podcasting, live streaming in general, we can take a look at those as well. Todd Carter asks, how do I become a guest in your list on podit.net? How does a new user go about getting started?
So you just go to podit.net and sign up, and it'll offer you a choice once you verify your email, it'll offer you a choice. Do you want to be, and you can do both later, but do you want to be a guest or a podcast? And then you go through a couple of steps and it's in the directory that quickly. Once you do that, and I would encourage you to go through then and make your profile better, because you're only as good as what you're going to look like. It's kind of like LinkedIn, right? You can do the bare minimum so you can polish it up. But once you're in, you can then go out and reach out to a podcast to be a guest. Or if you have a show, you can reach out to people to be a guest on your show. It sends them an email. They come to the site and boom, you're connected. It's not complicated.
Yeah. Now, an interesting topic for when you have a guest on a live stream show and you're doing an interview, how do you then decide when to go to the chat or not? Brian asks, when live streaming on Facebook, do you suggest a special segment for Q&A from people posting questions, or answer randomly during the podcast?
So I guess it depends on your style, Ross, and you're definitely more of an expert for this question. But I would say I've seen it both ways. And for me personally, I like the interactiveness. I like to go down the rabbit hole. I like the randomness of it. So I kind of go wherever it takes me. But there's a danger there to where you can go off topic. And I've seen it happen where the entire session ends up not covering what they intended to cover. So it really depends on your goal of that particular show. If you're a little more freestyle and that's what your audience resonates with, sure, go for it. But yeah, either way can work, I think.
Awesome question here from Sonia, because this is something that does come up from time to time when people want to know, what are we going to talk about? And she asked, do you go the length of actually giving questions to guests, particularly to famous guests who, it's not easy to get on your show in the first place. So if they say, can you fax me fax me, God, I'm dating myself, talk about a digital immigrant.
You're dating me too.
Yeah. Can you email me? Can you text me? Can you Facebook message me a list of questions?
I used to have a beeper.
Yeah, exactly. Page me when you've got those questions ready. In other words, what are your thoughts on giving people list of questions ahead of time, and particularly if it's a famous guest or somebody you really want to get on your show?
Yeah, so I don't like doing it at all. I've had maybe, I think, 6 guests that you would qualify as pretty tied to your like best-selling authors and that kind of thing. What I've found is that some of them become, never mind the question list, it's hard to get them off of being rehearsed, right? They have canned answers for almost everything you could ask them, because they go on Today's Show, they go on all these things, and they are on it. And so I would be less worried about a famous guest giving them questions, because I feel like they're going to be able to roll with it. They've been hit a million times by all kinds of different people. They're more professional at it, at the actual being interviewed, which is a skill, versus somebody that doesn't have that celebrity, maybe hasn't done it a lot. I might give them a cheat sheet. And I'd also expect to have to maybe coddle them or know when to jump in and pull it back and bail them out. But I wouldn't be as reluctant to do it with famous guests. I actually go the other direction with famous guests and try to find things that, angles on their topic, or really think about it and find things that might be interesting that they haven't gotten before. If I can get a famous guest to kind of go, that's a really good question, I love that, because they're having to stop and think, right?
And they respect it too most of the time. I mean, unless they're really trying to hide something. In general, it's like, wow, you really want to have a conversation about this. You're not just asking the same list of questions that I've been asked 100 times. You're pushing new ground on this. And a lot of times they like that. It opens up a new area of conversation. It's different.
Yeah, and you do have to be careful, though, because the publicist may want that, right? But I always have pushed back and say, well, here it is. But would it be okay, especially when you're doing a podcast, because you can edit it? It's easier than with the live stream. So, and get that. Oh, also another thing, do a guest release form too, if you can. There's some different free templates out there for that, because that will protect you after the fact if they want to say whatever. And I always try to lean on, helping them out as best I possibly can. But you want to protect yourself if they ever come back and try to say slander or something. There's probably a bigger risk with like a celebrity than other people.
Yeah, and I think there's sort of it's particularly with celebrities, best-selling authors, rock stars, politicians, whatever. When there's this sort of, and I kind of treat every guest this way, right? There's this sort of unwritten social compact that, like, I know you've got something to promote. I know you have a product, a website, you have a service that you're putting out there that you're working on. I'm going to give you a chance to talk about that during the interview. And I'm also going to ask you about your area of expertise, which may not only be that, but it may be podcasting in general, or there may be things in the news I want to ask you, whatever. But it's sort of like, I think you can work both into the interview where you let them have a chance to promote their book, for example. You ask a couple questions about that, and then you sort of free yourself up to, now I can go on. Or the other way, if they seem impatient, then you ask them the tough questions first, and then we'll get to the book in just a minute, but first, what do you think of?
Yeah, vetting is really important because some of the guests can really go the wrong way on you and really be over promoting and dropping the URL or the .com every few minutes. I've had it get to be overbearing. So, but on a podcast, that's a little easier. On the live stream, the only thing I could recommend is do a bit more vetting. Try to look at the social graph a little bit and make sure there's recommendations and things like that.
For podcasting, Brian Hebson asks, what length of time makes for an effective podcast? Is there a length of time? Is there a way to know whether your podcast is too short, too long, just right?
So I think everybody has a different point of view on this. Rogan does a 3-hour plus show. So it really just depends on your personality. And if it gets a period where it's like you're fleshing it out and it's like not interesting anymore, sure. But if you're making a show that's long form, there's people that love listening to long form. I think it depends a lot on your audience. And that's one thing too. It's easy and free to set up a Facebook group. I would recommend doing that pretty quickly as much as you can, so you can start getting that feedback to help you evolve and grow your show. Cause they will tell you if it's too long or if it's too short or whatever. They will help guide you into, and the hardest thing is getting them to pay attention in the first place. But once they're going to help guide you.
Question from Roy here, and I'll just summarize it as, how do you prep your guest? Because when you have a guest on who may not be familiar with the technology, or just, you want to make sure they've got the right audio and video connection to have the quality what you want, but you kind of don't want to offend them either. You don't want to give them an assignment. Like, how do you handle that dance to where you're making sure that they're going to be stable and that their audio and video are good, but you also want to do it as gently or as politely, or do you have a process for that? Do you send an email? How do you go about doing that?
So, like with everything, it seems here, it kind of depends a little bit on who you're interviewing, because some people, when we were doing Digital Dads, we did have a lot of people who had a challenge with this. When I'm doing this business podcast, I'm talking to people like Ross. So he's clearly really I don't really have to even say anything to Ross. Future state is something we want to build into. You remember I talked about those states in the interview inbox that we were talking about. Future state, we want to build something like that in, and you could and that way it's a little less in your face, because I know a lot of people have difficulty with that kind of thing to a guest, but the system can prompt them, right, and help them be better. As far as software, a lot of people use Zoom, a lot of people use Skype. I think both of those don't record locally, if I'm not mistaken. And so when the internet gets wonky or the connection gets bad, you just get what you get. There's a couple others out there like Squadcast, Riverside FM, Get Welder's a new one that record locally audio and in certain cases video. Those have been promising, but it's still a little glitchy. The best thing I could do is say, prompt them, and just maybe if you use like a calendar tool, I have a little thing in that. So when they go and schedule it, it auto responds with, hey, make sure you have headphones. Try to, if you can, have a hardwired internet connection, that kind of thing.
Right.
You're going to do everything you can to try to get them set up, and they're still going to fail on you sometimes, depending on who they are. I mean, it's a reality, and hopefully you won't have to throw out any episodes because of it. But I would say do the best you can and then go forward.
Yeah, and StreamYard does actually a really good job of mixing the audio and video from people of very different quality. And if you have a really good setup, for example, you can disable the audio processing. But if your guest is struggling with their audio, or you're hearing an echo or whatever, make sure that they do have that processing turned on. And that can help a lot, even if they don't have the right equipment or are in the best setting. Want to mention Tony's watching over on LinkedIn Live, and he says he's excited to be hosting his first panel next Tuesday. Just extended invitations to a few more guests now that we can have 10 on screen.
Good luck with that, Tony. You're a better man than I am.
Let us know when that's cut. Let us know. I want to check that out. I want to see a panel with 10 people or 8 people, 7 people.
Ross, so we used to, on my old show, Digital Dads, we used to just randomly let any dad come on the show and do like a round table and talking about audio quality and herding cats. It was incredibly hard. So kudos to anybody that goes down that road. Hopefully you know these people.
So he says they can't upload a video, only 5 minutes. I need about 1 hour. You can share a video by screen share. If it's long, you need longer than 5 minutes. You just slide that video into a browser, select the browser, your Chrome browser tab, and you can play it as a screen share, such as like when I do this. Now I'm sharing my screen. You can play a video that way as well if you need longer than 5 minutes. So as you look to the future of live streaming and podcasting and Podit, where do you see this going? I mean, now so many people are using this technology because they're at home and they've been forced to, whereas before it was more the specialist, the marketer, the person who had an enthusiasm for tech or for this type of communication. Where do you see this going? Do you think podcasts are going to grow? Do you think live streams are going to continue to grow? Do you think people will be able to monetize it more? Or do you think, it's still going to be a tough role for a lot of people? What do you see coming as we look ahead through the rest of 2020 and beyond?
Yeah, I think it will grow. I think you'll see correlating with the spike COVID, right? I think you're going to continue to see people spike because it's an amazing way to connect, whether it be live stream or podcasting. It's proven itself to be, and also it's a potential revenue stream. I think, unfortunately, some people get into it thinking that's what they're going to do. And they're going to get all these, like I did with Digital Dads, and you're going to get all these people listening, and then you're going to get all the sponsor dollars. Monetization is a whole different thing, but obviously you're using this as part of a bigger platform. And if you're strategic about it, yes, monetization can be a part of it. I don't think, though, it's going to be strictly in terms of download numbers or views numbers. I think it's more in terms of the clients that you can connect with, or just building a platform where people can funnel into some other products and services maybe you have, that kind of thing. But I think what you'll see is that, and again, who knows if I'm right, I'm just guessing, but you'll see this spike that goes up and then it'll settle down some after hopefully we come out of COVID. But I think it'll still always keep a high percentage because it's addictive. And while people keep flooding in and a bunch of them fall out because they realize it's work, but then a lot of them stick around and a lot of them become better. And a lot of them do another podcast later or a live stream later, and they grow because they want to have their voice out there. They like participating. And I love having more voices and participating in tools like StreamYard and others that are enabling that to happen. Because my gosh, imagine if this happened to us 50 years ago, back when we had the pagers. I don't know what we'd be doing, paging each other all the time. It's just a whole different world. And so, I mean, given the circumstances, it's always how you look at it, right? And I mean, given the circumstances, at least we are able to connect, able to elevate each other, learn from each other. It's powerful stuff.
Yeah, and you're making it easier by creating a website that can connect people and help you vet guests, help you book guests, help you connect with people who are also podcasting or live streaming, or just find those guests that you need to make your show great. He's not only the co-founder, as we showed before, he's actually got his own profile. Yeah, exactly. He's also a client, so you can actually book Brent to be a guest on your show and talk about podcasting and live streaming and guest hosting and all sorts of topics. It's just great having you on. I love what you're doing, and I appreciate you coming on and sharing some tips about being a guest, and all the best with Podit. We look forward to following how things go for you over the next couple of years.
Likewise, Ross. I'm a huge fan of you too, man. So thanks for the opportunity.